The word return is very important in the book of Ruth, and as we kind of walk through the second chapter tonight, then Naomi has been away from Bethlehem for 10 years. And you just stop and think how much have things changed in her little hometown in the 10 years that she's gone.
And just because she has physically come home doesn't mean that she is home because of all the things that have happened in her life while she was gone. And so tonight, Naomi returns home, and we're going to keep seeing words like empty, loss. You know, she's buried a husband, she's buried 2 sons, and has changed her name, and no longer call me Naomi, happiness, joy. I always think some kind of bouncy and fluffy. Call me Mara, call me bitter. I think of tears on the side of her face. And so for a lady who, in the last decade, may I use a term she wouldn't understand, but I think you will, she has gone through a number of Job experiences. You know what I'm trying to say by that? In the same way that, Job has lost 7 sons and 3 daughters, he's lost his health, he's lost his status in the community, then Naomi has had virtually a decade where the predominant thread and theme that has run through this decade has been a sense of loss and a sense of grief, very appropriately because of the things that has happened to her. But what I want us to notice tonight is that, and this is our central idea, God's providence is at work in Bethlehem in barley and wheat fields. And the second point is, just our aim, I want us to illustrate how God's providence is evident in working people's lives. And just anticipate this, and there's going to be quite a bit of contrast in different areas tonight. But when we read through the book of Esther, as we've done recently, notice here is an orphan who is adopted, who ends up being in the king's court in Persia. Oh, who knows, Esther, whether or not you have come into the kingdom for such a time as this. And tonight, kind of on the other end of the social spectrum, then here is and she refers to herself as a foreigner. Here is a young woman from Moab out working in the harvest fields. And what I want us to see, and we'll talk about this in some different ways as we walk through this tonight, is that God is equally at work in a Persian court as he is in a barley field. And one of the things I want each of us to kind of think about is that nothing has changed all these years later. And no, we may not have a street named after us, and no, there may not be a huge, parade at our funeral. But I'm confident God is still working in our lives in ways that we often don't understand and perceive at the time, no differently than he's been working in the lives of the people that we read through Scripture. So this was just kind of our introduction as we walked into Ruth. The story of Ruth moves from great loss, and then here's just one of this most wonderful confessions of loyalty. And probably other than Jonathan and David, here's one of the deepest examples of loyalty in the Old Testament. And sorry to repeat this because we're not all the same class. A couple of times as the couple has sat there and they have wanted this read at their wedding, I said, I'm quite glad to do that. But I looked at the bride-to-be and I said, you do realize this was spoken to her mother-in-law. And at least one of them she loved the words, and there's this beautiful song, Whither Thou Goest, and all these other beautiful things are going on. And she was thinking primarily of her husband, now where you go, I will go, and all this stuff. And I said, I'm quite happy to read it, but I just want you to know that the original words were spoken between a foreigner, a Moabite, and her Israelite mother-in-law. And I said, that doesn't change the words, but I just feel you should at least know the context of these words. And one of the girls actually changed and decided she did not want that read in the ceremony. And it wasn't a slam on her mother-in-law, but she had just assumed it was between a husband and a wife. And here is the loss, husband, 2 sons, and then she gains a loyal daughter-in-law that sacrifices so many things in her life in order to be that, and this wonderful confession of loyalty. And in his time, God is going to bring her into a new stage of life. The last funeral that I did, and I just love the book of Ecclesiastes, and wisdom says, for everything there's a season, there's a time and a manner for every purpose under heaven. And what is the very first thing that he says? There is a time to be born, and there is a time to die. And not just at a funeral, but it's very appropriate to think that the same relationship's not the word I want. The same presence of God that is there at a birth is equally there at a death. Oh, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. And those are things that are harder to absorb, they're harder to deal with, and yet at the same time, over a period of time, and I read a man once that said, God whispers to us during the good times, and sometimes he shouts to us during times that we're suffering. And sometimes, and this is something that just continue to say, and you'll see this again, 2 people will come to the same loss or to the same event, and one person will choose to draw closer to God, and they don't blame God and they're not angry at God. And another person will have something similar or maybe even something less, and they will just turn completely away from God, and there can't be a God if this would happen. And so this idea of dealing with loss in our lives is such an important part of this early part of the book. We're going to do the first one here as we read through, but I want you just to anticipate this. And Lord willing, next week we'll come and just do a short list. It's amazing in a short book how often the word and the name God, the Lord, is on the lips, first of all, of Naomi. And because of her relationship with her mother-in-law, we're going to find these words on the lips of Ruth, who is not an Israelite. And as we're introduced to Boaz today, then this is something that's just a very natural part of Boaz's life to speak about God, and that was just a very important part of his vocabulary. When we lived in Sydney, and again, think of Oklahoma City as 3.5 million people, we lived just in the far southwest part. We had midweek on Tuesday night, so Kyle's mom and dad can be with us because they were at another congregation on Wednesday nights. And after we all got there, my brother said, we have midweek on Tuesday night. We're going to leave it that way because we've done that for a long time. There's a basketball league on Wednesday night. Let's get together and play and see if we can meet some people. Well, a kangaroo is taller. A wallaby is a short version. And since none of us were very tall, we were the wallabies. We were the, the little bitty guys. And it's not a good system when Kelly referees our game and then 2 of us turn around and referees his game right after that. That doesn't work very well. Anyway, but that's how it was. And we were just the little bitty short guys, and we're in a huddle, and this shadow kind of appears over us, and here's this lovely 6'4" guy, and on and on. And the first thing Dallas says is, "Oh, you guys are Christians, aren't you?" And I said, "Did you read it on a form or something?" He said, "No." He said, "I just watched a couple of games. Not one word of profanity. No one hit each other. And I've been playing for a long time. I'm Seventh-day Adventist, but you guys are Christians. I can tell because I've watched you play a couple of games." He said, "I promised this bunch of hoodlums I would play with them, but as soon as this round is over, I would love to play with you guys." So for the next 5 years, then Dallas played with us. If you're Seventh-day Adventist, you can't play from sundown on Friday night until sundown on Saturday night. And we would never pressure him to do otherwise. But we would also try to, in a tournament, try to get there. And we'd try to get to the finals on Saturday night, and we would have shoe trouble. We'd have delays because he's in the car, he's dressed, but he will not come in until the sun is down. And so we delay and halt as long as we can to get him in to help us. But here's the point. Coming or going, all the time, Dallas would say something, may the grace of the Lord be with you. May the peace of God bless your heart. And it was just such a natural part of his vocabulary. And I still visit him each time that I can when we go back. But what a blessing to then know somebody, and he's not taking the Lord's name in vain, but it's something like, again, peace be with you, God be with you. And so notice that as you read through Ruth, this is a thread that is in the vocabulary, first of all, of Naomi. And because Ruth is around her mother-in-law, then we're going to find this vocabulary on the lips of Ruth. And then, as we're introduced to Boaz, he goes out into the field, and as he's talking to the guys working in the field, then the name and the blessing of the Lord is upon them. And just anticipate as we read through, here's a wonderful indicator of what's going on in these people's hearts and lives. I read something once about character, and the guy was saying, and of course this was from a rural illustration, so why it stuck with me. He said, have you ever seen a little boy carrying a full bucket of water down the road? And every once in a while it'll kind of bump his leg, and he said, and what's on the inside will slosh out. And he said, that's how life is with us. We sometimes get bumped through life, and whatever's on the inside is going to come out when we get bumped. And so what we're going to see is that the one thing that these people, though very different context, time-wise, and other stuff initially, one of the threads that's going to hold their family together is this common sense of the name, the blessing, the peace of the Lord is constantly on their lips. We introduced the word hesed last week, and hesed oftentimes is translated steadfast love. In our passage, it's going to be translated kindness. My favorite, just two words of love with loyalty. For years, and it's been sung for a long time, the heart of the lament. Here's the weeping prophet in Jerusalem, and there's nothing to eat, and on and on. And what does he say? The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. The Lord is my portion. I don't have anything to eat, but the Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. So this word's used nearly 300 times in the Old Testament, not quite, but we're going to hear this term of love with loyalty and the kindness of the Lord, Naomi's going to say, has been extended to both the living and to the dead. And this is, to me, one of those really significant words because hesed, loyalty, love, is also a covenant word. And it's one of those words of commitment. And for those of us that are the sons and daughters of God, the love with loyalty that has been extended to us through our Heavenly Father is what we're to extend with and to and through each other in our relationships. So notice, very early, Naomi expresses hesed, love toward orphan Ruth. I'm sorry, girls, I'm going home. You should go back to your families, find a husband, start a family. And so what is she doing? Rather than looking after her interest, she is saying, girls, I want you to go and do what's best for you. And you stop and think about it. Moab is on the other side of the Dead Sea, and she is in a lot of danger traveling by herself from one foreign country to another to come around the Dead Sea and all the way to Bethlehem. I don't know if she had any other arrangements, but that always just kind of strikes me when I read this. Her intent for the good of her daughter-in-laws is expressed in hesed, seeking their best interest. We're going to end up again tonight with mother-in-law, father-in-law, in-law relationships. And one of the things that I laugh about, and I do this kindly, there's no sarcasm or snarkiness about this, but I'm close friends with 3 families that have 4 boys. Can you imagine the chaos that's going to develop when the first daughter-in-law comes into that mess? They have camped out, they've hiked, they've done all this other stuff. If I use the word tomboy, I'm saying this as a compliment. Mom's just a real athletic, on and on it goes. And I'm thinking, and here's going to come some frilly, soft-spoken, sweetheart daughter-in-law, and it's just going to change the whole family altogether because, for 2 decades, they've been quite happy doing boy stuff. And then all of a sudden, and then you stop and think, and then we multiply that times 4. And how much is the dynamic of that family going to change? I do have a couple of friends who have all girls, and the guys are quietly saying, I can't wait till there's another guy in the house with us, at least one. And that's just a part of life. But here's what I want you to think about. Hesed, steadfast love, loyalty, covenant, isn't a matter of sexual preference, male, female. It isn't a matter of, well, I might or I might not. Hesed is this sense of devotion in how we commit and help and work with other people, specifically those who are in need. Let me just do this really quickly. I was asked this yesterday, and it just came to mind. I was doing a Wednesday night in a church not too far from here. Finished Wednesday night, visiting, and this girl comes up and she says, I was a little bit older than you, and you may not remember, but I grew up in your home congregation. And then here it started. She said, I became pregnant in the mid-60s. And she said, the absolute shame of being pregnant, and all my folks are Christians, and on and on. And she said, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, my guilt grew every day because she's starting to show. And they prayed and talked about it, and they said, okay, we're going to go to Amarillo, to an unwed mother's home, have the baby, have it adopted to people who are members of the church, and on and on. And I had just faintly remembered that. But you can just imagine, if that's you, you know every detail of it, because that was the burden of her heart. And she said, you don't know this, but she said, every day that I was there, your grandmother, as an elder's wife, wrote me a handwritten letter every day that I was there. Sweetheart, do not let one mistake shape your whole life. Sweetheart, you are going to make a family that has been wanting children, that's not going to have children. And she said, every day that I was there, I got at least 1 and sometimes 2 handwritten letters from an elder's wife to encourage me in some of the darkest days of my life. And then she said, I will forever believe that I am an elder's wife today because of your grandmother's letters to me during one of the darkest times of my life. What's that? Hesed. That's that covenant loyalty. That's that stick-to-itiveness. And this is the kind of thing that we want to extend and to show to other people. So when you look at Naomi, she receives Hesed in asking her daughters to leave, but Ruth won't. And then here it's reciprocated. Then Ruth turns around and says, no, I'm going to stay with you. And we'll read her comments again at the very end. This is in the middle of number 2 asterisks, but think about this. Rather than going back to her family, finding a husband among her own people, having the stability of a family in her own culture and her own people, Ruth is choosing a life of virtual poverty and estrangeness by going to a place she's never been before. And that's why you will find at least 7 times the word either Moabitess or stranger or visitor. And so she chooses to just totally surrender all of her home culture, all of her background, and the gods that she had grown up with. And that always amazes me. Your God will be my God. And so the Hesed that initially was shown from the mother-in-law to the daughter is reciprocated. And then what we're going to see tonight, then when, and I'm doing this in quotations, she just happens to go to the field of Boaz, the text says. And I'm thinking, yes. And Xerxes just happened to be awake one night and couldn't sleep, and they brought the documents in that told about Mordecai. And this is what I want you to see. The providence and the work of God is being done, and this isn't dividing the Red Sea, this isn't feeding the 5,000, but in little ways, God is working in and through the lives of common people to bring about his will. I want to do number 3 very quickly. We've done this, and it's been a while, but the point will be very easy. In the ancient world, and again, polytheism is many, many gods, most people were under the conviction that the gods were localized. They were in a certain area. 3 quick examples. The Syrians said, 1 Kings 20, and this is from 23 through 28, they were defeated by the Israelites. Oh, their gods are the God of the hills. We'll come back next year and fight them in the valley and we'll win. See what I'm talking about? They're giving geographical location to gods, and then God is going to say, because they said he's the Lord of the hills, therefore I will give this great multitude into your hand in the valleys, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Naaman the leper, notice very carefully, he's cured of leprosy. He wants to give physical gifts, and the prophet won't take them. And what does he say? I want 2 mule loads of earth, to take with me. Why does someone on a long journey want 2 mule loads of earth from Israel? Oh, that represents the God who's healed him of his leprosy. And I'm sorry, I laugh. Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish to escape from the presence of the Lord. And when the storm comes and on, he tells them, he says, well, this is probably about me because I'm doing this. I'm leaving Israel to escape the presence of the Lord. So both outsiders and Israelites are going to assume that God is the God of a certain location. So here's the very bottom, and notice this. This is a very important point for people in antiquity, but it's true for us. God is not limited and isolated to a certain geographical area. And notice, the God of Joseph in Egypt is the same God of Daniel in Babylon, nationally. Culturally, the God of Daniel in a royal court in Babylon is also the God of Ezekiel, who is living among the common people, the captives. Socially, the God of Esther, the queen of Persia, is also the God of Ruth, working in a barley field. And then we've done this before, but Abraham's roughly 2000 BC, Moses 1500, David 1000, Daniel, the first one is 606 when he's taken into captivity. And here's what I want us just to kind of sink in. God is quietly, and sometimes there's spectacular things, but God is most often quietly working in our lives today as he was in the lives of an Israelite widow who's mourning and after a decade is returning back with a foreign daughter-in-law. And here's what's significant, and we're going to, Lord willing, touch on this again next week. At some point, well, let me do it this way. Isaiah 49, I think it's verse 6, says, Israel was to be a light to the nations. And that's both to proclaim the existence of God and to make God known. And at some point, they got the idea, no, God is just the God of us, and he's not the God of other people. And over and again, God is going to refute that in different ways. But some Israelites would be really happy for God to be working in the lives of Hebrews and Israelites. But what's this about God working in the life of a Moabite? And what we're going to see, and again, toward the end of the Old Testament, more often than he was in earlier times, he will be referred to as the God of heaven. And that's very appropriate because it's not just a geographical God of a specific physical place, but he's the God, yes, of Israel. He's the God of people who are in foreign places as well. So we're in Ruth chapter 2, and let's just do a short reading. Naomi had a relative of her husband's, and this word worthy is a very interesting word. It can mean rich. It has to do with character. It has to do with capable in terms of skilled. But this translation says, he was a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And I'm doing this from memory last week. Isn't Boaz fleetness and strength? And see, that's why I just do this. She named her kids Sickly and Mildly. And why would you ever, the pining one, why would you ever name your sons Milon and Chilon? I don't know if they were sick when they were little or what, but the two sons that are buried are Milon and Chilon's weakness and sickness and these other things. And of all things, we're introduced to fleetness and strength. And again, just the names is very interesting as the story unfolds. Ruth, and again, the Moabite, and see how often that's said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, after him in whose sight I shall find favor." She has no idea who this might be. And Naomi says to her, "Go, my daughter." Did you catch it? The lady who's lost two sons now refers to this one as my daughter. And I won't give you more details because I've done it before, but within a month or 6 weeks after coming into Sheila's house, I just called her Mom. And when Richard and Craig weren't around, she called me son. And it was really nice to be in a house where it's not like, oh, you're the in-law or you're the outlaw. And just right away then just called her Mom. And so every time I read this, I think, okay, you've lost, but you have this sweetheart of a girl who's going to stick with you. So she refers to her as the physical daughter that she never had. Go, my daughter. So Ruth set out. She went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And I didn't put the text down, but when you read in Deuteronomy and other places, and maybe in Exodus as well, there was a law, there was a rule, and a lot of this is being done with sickles and hand and other stuff. But if heads and sheaves of grain fall to the ground, you're to leave them on the ground for either the poor or the other people who are working in the field to glean. And you're not to do all of the corners. You're to leave the corners. There were very specific regulations for how you were to go about harvesting the crops. And there were some very specific regulations given to help benefit the people who were poor. And so Ruth then goes out into the fields. And again, you think of harvest time in Oklahoma, this is going to be sticky and hot. And when you start doing wheat and barley, there's these little bitty bits of shell and hull that get on you. And I've come in some nights and just itching nerdy like I've got poison ivy on the creases of my skin because that little bit gets in and just irritates on you. They're not doing this on a combine. They're not doing this on a tractor. They're doing this by hand. So this wonderful girl goes out and she is in the harvest fields. If anything drops, she can get that. If there's a little bit extra, she can get that. Oh, you can do the corners. And so that's what she does. I had to underline this. She happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the clan of Elimelech. Sheer accident, just a coincidence. Boaz came from Bethlehem, and notice, here he comes, and what does he say to the guys working in the field? The Lord be with you. And see, what does that tell us about him right off? Yes, he may be fleetness and strength. He may be this hunk of a guy. He may be strong, but when he greets the guys working in his field, what comes out of his heart and his mouth is, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, oh, who's that young woman over there? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers said, oh, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. What kind of a reputation is the girl already developing? Stranger, foreigner, but here she is out working in the field to feed her and her mother-in-law. And then she said, Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. See what I'm talking about? When heads fall and other stuff, can I do that? She probably is not going to be physically strong enough to be doing these sickles, to be doing all the cutting herself. Can I use the word scavenger? And I'm not trying to put her down. I'm just saying that's what she can do. And anything that's dropped, anything that's extra, then that's what she's going to have the opportunity. But here it comes. She came and has continually worked from early in the morning until now, except for a short rest. Since my roommate is not here, if you want to get her fired up sometime, you ask her, what was it like when you went home to the farm and you had a hoe, a cotton hoe, in front of an 18-foot combine trying to chop the weeds down before the wheat harvester put weeds in the seed wheat. It's over 100 degrees. She didn't grow up using a hoe, so she ran to the pickup and got an axe. Can you imagine being in front of a 14 and 18-foot combine that's in third gear trying to get the careless weeds and the thistles cut down out of the seed wheat? And she said, I had a chance to run and I didn't do it. I should have done it right then. Boaz says to Ruth in 2:8, listen, my daughter, do not glean in another field. Do not leave this one. Keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the fields that are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? When you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. And she fell on her face, bound to the ground, and she said, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me? I'm a foreigner. And again, notice the reputation that has preceded her. All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. Here, the concept of hesed, love with loyalty, commitment to doing the best. And then he says, you left your father and mother and your native land and have come to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward will be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Lord willing, let me mention this to anticipate next week. Do you remember when we come to the next chapter that Boaz is in the threshing floor, whatever, and Naomi basically says, sweetheart, clean up and wear the best thing you've got and go sleep at his feet. We're not quite into that culture, but that's what she's told to do. And when he woke up, he put his skirt over her to protect her through the night. And this word here, the Lord of Israel, whose wings you have come to take refuge, is like this covering, protecting. And that's going to be the same word that's going to be used when Boaz identifies who he is, and then he spreads whatever it is, this skirter thing, over her physically to protect her. So we're going to have a similarity, a parallel between God's spiritual protection of his people and then physically his protection of her when she comes to the threshing floor. But there it is. The Lord repay you, the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I'm not one of your servants. And at the mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel into the wine. So she sat beside the reapers. He passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. And what we're going to find, she also then is thinking of Naomi and is taking the food that she's been given that she's not eating. She's going to take that home for her mother-in-law actually to eat. When she arose to glean, Boaz said to the young men, let her glean even among the sheaves and do not reproach her. Pull a little bit out and let it fall on the ground among the sheaves and leave it to her to glean. As Hugo McCord said, I believe a little bit of chemistry has taken place here. Brother Cord was just such a saint, and he was reading through this, and he kind of gave this description. He had that really soft, mellow voice, and all these things, take care of her. We don't want you to get molested in another field. You can drink with our guys. We want you to stick with us, and you guys be a little bit careless out there and drop some extra heads of grain for her to get to help her while she's working in the field. And leave it for her to glean, do not rebuke her. She gleaned in the field until evening. She beat out what she had gleaned. I don't know what an ephah is, about 3/5 of a bushel, roughly 5.8 gallons of barley. Okay, hopefully one of those you can identify. We did bushel baskets all the time with apples and all other kinds of stuff. So it's about 3/5 of a bushel, or about 5.96 gallons of barley. Okay, and stop and think. She can't go work in a corner store. There's limitations on what she can do financially. And so here she is working all day in the field, and then this is what she has to take home after she's finished her work. So we're in 2:18. She went and took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and Ruth also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said, "Well, where did you glean today? Where have you worked? And blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and the man's name who I worked today is Boaz. Can you see the twinkle in Naomi's eye? Mara, bitter, the one who's had all of this loss, and here's this smile that comes over her face and this twinkle in her eye, and she's going to say, "Oh, may he be blessed by the Lord." See what I'm saying? When you listen to these people's conversations, whether it's the mother-in-law and now the daughter and now Boaz, the name and the word of God is always on their lips. May he be blessed by the Lord, and here's our word, whose kindness, this is hesed, kindness, love with loyalty. His kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And then Naomi said, "The man is a closer relative of ours, and isn't this a wonderful term? He is one of our redeemers." Now, this is not the redemption of Jesus and blood on the cross, but it is the concept and like the type and the shadow. There was a procedure that took place so that property in fields stayed within certain families. Let me do it on the other hand. The year of Jubilee was every 50 years, and on the 50th year, then the property was to go back to the original inheritor. So if you sold the field on the 48th year after Jubilee, then you sold it for the number of years until the 50th year, and then technically the property was always to go back to the original families, was the original teaching on that. And so all of the male descendants of Elimelech's family are dead. The father's dead, the two sons are dead. And so anticipate this. A part of the hesed of Boaz is that when we see in 3 and 4, he goes to the other near kinsman. He doesn't want to do that. When Boaz takes Ruth as his wife, neither the field nor the descendants or the children will technically be his. They will all stay in the family of Elimelech. And so he's willing to allow a whole generation of people to come into the world, and he personally will not get any financial benefit other than, if we use the word rent, the fields will be theirs, but in terms of it will always belong to the family of Elimelech. And so a part of the kinsman redeemer, and this is probably why the other guy said, "No, I don't want to do this," is that the children that they will have then will inherit the original property belonging to Elimelech, and the kinsman redeemer will not be able to claim that as his own property. Hesed, love with loyalty, kindness, and that's the family characteristic that you see is going to develop within these people. So 2:21, Ruth the Moabitess, and see how often we're told that, said, "Blessed," he said to me, "you shall keep close by my young men until they've finished all my harvest." And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field, and some translations will say molested, assaulted, and she kept close to the young women of Boaz. And I just made this note. Remember, we're in the time of Judges. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. This is a dangerous place for women to be out working in the fields, but she will be physically protected working in Boaz's field. And then here's context. She was gleaning until the end of the barley harvest, Passover, and wheat harvest, Pentecost, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So we're going to have probably a 2 or 3 month window here. And if you've been here when we've done the Old Testament things, walking through the Old Testament, barley ripens quicker than wheat. And so if we're up in Galilee, let's go this way, let's do Galilee here and Jerusalem down here, then the barley would get ripe, they will harvest that, and then God says 3 times a year the men are to appear before me in Jerusalem. And so once the barley harvest is finished, then we go to Jerusalem and we do the Passover. 50 days later, we go back home, and while we're coming and going, the wheat harvest finishes, and then we finish the wheat harvest, and then we come back for Pentecost 50 days later. And something that not always, but I typically think of in Acts chapter 2, they were all assembled on Pentecost, and there was a sound of a rushing mighty wind, and tongues of fire appeared on the feast of the physical harvest is going to be the context and the background of the first spiritual harvest of people into the kingdom of heaven. And so we know from this that there's about a 3-month window here where then Ruth is working as a gleaner and through that context, because if she works through the barley harvest, that will be Passover, and then the wheat harvest will come in, and at least that part of what she's able to do will finish. Some of you will recognize this. I never did do this, thankfully, but I had some friends that would literally start down in Texas and would cut wheat to Canada. And when the wheat ripens all across the North American prairie, then they start and they literally work their way all the way up to the flat central areas of Canada. But out in our part of the state, there was just the whole community gave a sigh of relief when we finally got the wheat in. Just like tonight, you're looking to the southwest and it starts rumbling and it starts turning dark blue, and you're wondering, too much rain, hail, too much wind, and kind of when the wheat harvest is finally done, everyone kind of goes, we finally got it in. And so she's going to be a part of that. Ruth 1, they start in Bethlehem, 10 years in Moab. Ruth 2, we start in Naomi's house. We end up in the harvest fields. A migrant Israelite family goes to a foreign land. A foreign woman comes back for hospitality. Mara, empty. She's about to be filled through the process of the things that happened. But here's what I want you to notice. This little statement, your God will be my God. Can I say it this way? Ruth has seen Naomi probably and I use the term when things are good, at her best, but she has seen her mother-in-law through the death, the funeral, and the burial of a husband and 2 sons. And she is going to say, your God will be my God. And this is something, and I'm not trying to make light of this, I'm not trying to minimize this, because suffering is suffering and we will just grieve. But as Scripture says, not as those who have no hope. But isn't this interesting that a foreigner becomes a part of the people of God because of the character that she saw in her mother-in-law through the death and burial of a husband and 2 sons? And you can't fake it. And she has seen her at kind of both ends of life, and because of that, then she's going to say, your God will be my God. I want to save, I did this part here about the making of a leader, but let me just do one thing, and then I'll save this again for next week. See this term sovereign foundations, and I'll reproduce this whole thing. When you go back and look at your life, well, Kelly, you grew up in Maysfield. How many in your family? 4. Dad's an elder. And of all things, my brother-in-law and sister come when Kelly's 12 years old. And the Fox family teaches and preaches there. He still has notes on apologetics that Marion had taught as a 12-year-old. And what I want you to see, and then if we stop and look in all of our lives, especially those first 2 decades, God is doing things in our lives to equip us later to do stuff, but we don't know at the time that's what he's doing. And you stop and think. When David is turning down Saul's armor, he starts talking about taking lambs from the mouths and the paws of lions and bears. I mean, you talk about having some starch in your shirt. Oh, I rescued my lambs from the paw of a lion and the paw of a bear, and then from the mouth of them. Well, when he goes and faces this giant, he's had that feeling before, and look how God's going to use something earlier to equip him for something later. And we'll come back to this because this is an important matter, but because of time, we'll come back. If you look at the next page, I hope you'll always remember this. As we look at our lives, we will see things in the rearview mirror that we never saw in the windshield. And all of us at one time or another will look back and say, I had no idea that was going on, but now I see, okay, this is what God was doing. Let me say this kindly. My mom wasn't well sometimes, and from the time I was probably 12 or 13, maybe until she died, she thought I was both on drugs and was a drug dealer. Yes, Mom, working for a church is just a front, and if you go to the garage, then all the stuff's there. And when she wasn't well, like she comes to visit us in Sydney, Mom, I need to catch 2 buses and a train to take this to the Sydney Library. I'll leave you here on Central Street. There's shop stuff. I will come back and get you. I'm 36 years old. I've been a missionary in Australia for 10 years. And we get home and Mom tells Sheila, she says, yeah, he said he had a book. He said he was going to do that, but he didn't fool me. He was making a drug drop today. I'm at church camp with Lyndall Bolin, who was just a godsend, and he convinced me God is always using difficult things in our lives to equip us to deal with things later, that because we learn how to cope with these, then God will be preparing us for other things later. I'm not going to tell you, but I have been in some horrible, horrible church fights, not that I started. I've been called every name in the book. I've been called virtually everything other than pagan. And I can just look at them and just say, well, I don't have to agree with that. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you have no idea. You can call me anything you want to. My mom thinks I'm a drug dealer. And sometimes Sheila says, you're sick. She had a lady who she worked with who was just a nutcase, had 6 adopted kids, and she literally had a chain and a lock on the refrigerator so they didn't get some bread or milk out at night without her being there. Sheila, does he beat you? Let's talk about me. Does he read Psalms? You know, all this other stuff on and on. Every time I saw her, I had to go hug her. And Sheila said, you are so sick. I said, I'm not going to let that deranged woman ruin our lives. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, my mom thinks I'm a drug dealer. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but here's what I want you to see. When we look at our lives, God is oftentimes working in things we don't understand at the time to equip us to do and to be things later that we couldn't do without that. And here's what I'm convinced of. God has neither died nor gone to sleep since Scripture was written. And if he's working in the lives of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, he ought to be working in our lives as well. I'm going to save the song until next week because of time. Let's look at 4, and we'll do these real quick, and I'll let you go. If Ruth and Boaz were as strong as they were as singles, can you imagine what their marriage was like? I'm in an Old Testament class. Someone asked Jack Lewis, when would you start creating faith in a child? And he said, I think I would start with his grandparents. And you stop and think, and again, please take this the right way. A part of the reason why grandparents and grandchildren are so close to each other is that they share a common enemy. And you know what I'm saying. We can do stuff with our grandkids that we couldn't actually do with our kids. But look at the potential spiritually that we also have as grandparents. So David becomes the man after God's own heart. It started 4 generations earlier with these godly people with God on their lips and on their hearts. And so fleetness and strength married a loyal female friend, Ruth. Child, Obed, serving and worshiper. Child, Jesse, Jehovah exists. Child, David, beloved. And when we come across this man after God's own heart, then what we have in the book of Ruth is the spiritual family tree. Walter Merrick bred quarter horses out in Sayre. 3 bars, an Easy Jet and Smooth Jet, just had dozens and dozens of fabulous race horses. And you talk with people about quarter horses, and Walter Merrick saying, oh yes, and all this other stuff. I'm using the term bloodline. Well, here we have a spiritual bloodline. And because of Hesed, this love with loyalty, then as this family comes together, and he is willing for Obed, Jesse, and David to inherit something that he'll never get. He is the kinsman redeemer. And then here comes the spiritual bloodline that produces the man after God's own heart. So we all have defining moments, abbreviated. Beseech me not to leave you. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. And then here it comes. Your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. And here's something that I ask myself, especially with a daughter-in-law and 2 son-in-laws. Would my daughter-in-law and either one of my son-in-laws ever want to have and to share in the same faith that I have?